is Paul Delaney, and welcome to Angkor Wat. I apologize that this won't be super visible. I'm having some problems getting my laptop to record through the function that lets you record the screen, so I will be attaching this to the discussion board as well so you can follow along. So first of all, where is Angkor Wat? It's located in modern-day Cambodia in the Siem Reap province. Historically, this region is known as Angkor, and it once served as the capital of the Khmer Empire. Today, this area is known as the Angkor Archaeological Site. And overall, the temple complex was constructed over the course of 3 decades by King Suryavarman II. This was a common trend among Khmer kings. At the height of the empire's influence, each of them was trying to create a legacy by building a temple complex that was bigger or grander or more pleasing than the predecessors. So Angkor Wat itself, construction began in 1113 and ended at 1149. Now, because Angkor was the capital of the Khmer Empire at the time, it was common that the reigning monarch would reside there. Despite this, Angkor Wat was originally designed to be a temple dedicated to Vishnu. Unfortunately, in 1177, Angkor was sacked by the Kham people of Vietnam, causing the later king Jayavarman VII. He shunned the Hindu gods as a result of this, and he constructed a new temple complex called Angkor Thom nearby, close to Angkor Wat, and he switched the state religion to Buddhism. This caused an abandonment of Angkor Wat at large, but the site was still maintained by local monks, and in 1863 it was rediscovered by the French colonial empire, but we'll talk more about that later. So, what is Angkor Wat actually made out of? So at first it looks like the entire thing is constructed out of just stone blocks, and you would kind of be correct, but kind of not, because there's actually a lot of layers to this. A substantial portion of the complex is constructed of laterite, which is a red clay-like material. It's very soft when it's pulled out of the ground, but when it has time to sit in the sun, it will dry to a very hard and solid material. It was framed up and layered with this laterite material, kind of like drywall, and then the sandstone blocks were floated down the Mekong River from a nearby plateau, and then a lot of times layered against this laterite, kind of like how you'd have tile siding in your house. So as for the actual design of the complex, it was made to look like a series of 3-dimensional mandalas. The center of the temple represents Mount Meru, and the rest of the temple represents the lower plane of the earth. And finally, the 4-meter deep moat around the entire complex symbolizes the cosmic sea, or the ocean surrounding the edge of the earth. The moat itself serves a dual function, so Angkor Wat was designed on very flat land, meaning it was necessary, obviously, to acquire water in a substantial way. The Mekong River that they floated the sandstone blocks down, it provides plenty of drinking water and symbolic moat-making water. So here we've got a map of the Angkor region. So down here in the bottom left corner is Angkor Wat, and here is the Angkor Thom complex that was constructed after the defeat at the hands of the Kham people. So at first it might seem that Angkor Wat is like a playground, but this is actually 400 acres of land, approximately. So Angkor Wat definitely isn't small. Angkor Thom is just absolutely massive. So keep that in mind as we start to proceed further. And because now that we've seen the entire Angkor region, let's zoom in on Angkor Wat. So here is the aerial view of Angkor Wat, which hopefully makes the size and scale of this a little bit clearer. The first thing you might notice is the extremely long approach from the west. This is by design. Vishnu was associated with the west, and so the temple's front is in the west direction, so facing this way is almost directly west. And additionally, it was a common belief that the longer a temple's approach was, the holier or more sanctified that the temple was. So it's a very common ritualistic practice to see. It's common at Angkor Thom. It's common throughout the entire region, pretty much. And as you can see, Angkor Wat is definitely no exception. From either way you can get across the moat, you have to pass a very long way before you can approach the temple proper. So here is a map of the complex. The most dense pieces, this is the interior, so this is not including the causeway or the western entrance that I just talked about, or the approach, but hopefully this kind of helps create a mental image of what this site looks like, especially in terms of symmetry, because once you get inside, it can be a very confusing place to visit, and it's hard to tell where pictures are being taken from because everything is essentially the same color and shape. Now, let's actually enter Angkor Wat. So, like I said, it's customary to approach from the west because that's the direction with which Vishnu is associated. So if you walk across the long causeway, you will come to what is called the West Gopura. It's located here between numbers 1 and 2 on the map, and a Gopura is simply an entry building. It's typically cruciform in design, and notably these Gopuras in Angkor have a tower at the crux. In the case of the West Gopura, it's got 3 towers as well. There's one on the other end over here that you can't quite see. So it's a very interesting style of architecture that is common throughout all of Angkor, not just Angkor Wat. So we'll see more about what is actually, there's other Gopuras as well. There's an eastern Gopura and a north and southern Gopuras, but we'll talk about them later. Each of the Gopuras, particularly the west one, has extensive carvings on the columns and pediments, and throughout history, monks have often painted murals on the walls as well. So immediately after you come through the Gopura, you'll see 2 buildings on either side of you, and if we go back to the label diagram, this is at point 3 and its mirror image across. So these are what are called the libraries, and you can see them from the elevated causeway path that leads to the temple complex at large. So these are, like I said, these are the first 2 libraries of Angkor Wat. There are actually 6 that have been identified, and as you can see, the buildings here are so symmetrical in design that the tree is the only way that you can really tell that these aren't just a mirror image of one another, which is a very interesting style of architecture, and it's very impressive that they were able to make them so symmetrical. There's the use of the libraries is somewhat contested or disputed, but it is believed that these are actually shrines and not just depositories for manuscripts, like we would think of a library today, where it's almost just a depository for books. It's sort of more like they were miniature shrines that would hold likenesses of the gods that were deeper in the complex as well. And so I've included 2 other pictures, which one of these is the interior north library, which is located on the 2nd level of the temple complex, which we'll get to in a moment. And finally is an interior structural library, which is also located further in the temple. These libraries are very common and are found throughout Angkor, so once again, another staple of Angkorian architecture. Even though their original purpose is somewhat unknown, we do know that they are everywhere throughout the Angkor region. So after you pass down the long causeway path, after coming through, passing the libraries, so if we go back briefly, we arrive at this large cross shape here, which is known as the Terrace of Honor. And this is essentially the entryway that you pass through into the actual temple complex. So you will arrive on the first level of the complex. There are 3 in total. And this is denoted by number 6 on the labeled map a few slides before. And the 2 interior libraries that I mentioned are also located on this first level of the temple complex, and they are at positions 7 and 14. There are also 4 sacred ponds located in a square shape on the first level, and unfortunately I wasn't able to find out what the purpose of these ponds was, if they were just decorative or if they served a practical function. But one of the most impressive features of this level is what's called the Preah Pond, or it's called the Cruciform Cloister, and the official title of it is called the Hall of 1,000 Gods, and it's called this because it's home to many, many statues of Buddha and other gods. and is considered to be one of the most sacred spots in the entire complex, aside from the Bakan, which is the third level. This level is also home to a lot of engravings, and just like there were pediments at the entrance, there are pediments deeper in the temple, as you can see here, that feature their own unique carvings. So after you complete your walk through the first level of the temple, you arrive at level 2. This level is home to a lot of carvings as well. Unfortunately, it is kind of lackluster because it primarily serves as a base for the Bakan, or the third level, but it does have two of its own, the structural libraries that I mentioned earlier. Again, these were probably smaller shrines as opposed to just manuscript depositories. But after you pass through the second level, you will arrive at a very steep set of stairs that will take you up to the Bakan, or the third level, and the most sanctified of all the levels at Angkor Wat. This is the famous 5 spires, which I'm sure you've all seen pictures of before the presentation. The corners represent mountains, and there are 4 lower shrines, and the 5th represents Mountain Ru, or the home of the gods in Khmer culture. And it was not just a shrine to worship in, but it was considered a house of a god. So it's actually kind of the opposite of what we might think of as a shrine. Because it was considered the house of the god, it was not actually common for people to go and worship publicly in the shrine. It was really only big enough to hold the likeness of the god for which the temple was dedicated. Today it contains a statue of Buddha. Originally it probably would have been Vishnu, which we can see the statue of Buddha here. Also, each of the sanctuaries or shrines had wooden supports and wooden doors that could be closed or open to the world. Over time, these were sealed up by Buddhist monks on 3 sides, so now there's only really one way into each of the sanctuaries. Each of the sanctuaries also contains a statuary, which typically has steles or statues or representations of other gods or Buddha. Smaller typically and less ornate, obviously, than the large wooden statue of Buddha seen here, but still very impressive nonetheless. The center tower, interestingly, it aligns with the vernal equinox. So at the equinox, the sun will rise and set directly in line with the tower, and this was representative of the new year to the Khmer people, and it's also obviously related to divinity, because the sun was rising over the home of the gods, or Mount Meru. Now, after we've finished our tour through Angkor Wat, the visitor would have 2 options. Either you can turn around and go all the way back through the western entrance, or you can just proceed straight ahead, continuing from west to east, and arrive at what is called the East Gapura. This is the only other causeway across the moat, so there's one at the western end and one at the eastern end. This gate is typically used by locals or monks because it has much less pedestrian or tourist foot traffic, but it serves the exact same purpose as the Western Gapura, which is, it is an entry building. This building, you can't see it here, but you might be able to see it on the presentation down low. It's kind of red in color. It's not necessarily paint. That is the laterite. This Gapura is constructed of the red clay-like laterite. I've got a picture down here of the North Gapura, which is identical to the South Gapura, and another display of the Khmer's love of symmetry and wanting to depict their temple almost perfectly symmetrically. Now, the North and South Gapura do not have their own causeways today, but it is hypothesized that they had a wooden bridge or causeway at one time that's probably rotted away or since been destroyed. So now we finally arrive at Angkor today. So as I said at the start of the presentation, Angkor was rediscovered in 1863, quote-unquote rediscovered. It was never really fully abandoned, but the French colonial government found it in 1863 and formalized its position again. It was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1992, and in 1994 the Cambodian royal government protected it by a royal edict. And unfortunately, despite the really strong foundations and the strength of the laterite and sandstone, modern foot traffic is starting to wear away at a lot of the areas of the temple. And so in response, officials and the Cambodian government have tried to promote the cultural significance of the site rather than just its structural significance, because the site is still used as a worship temple today. Locals will go to it just like some of us would go to a church in town today. So ideally, they're trying to create a tourist market that is more respectful of the grounds and is content with staying on desired paths that would cause the least amount of wear on the temple complex. And hopefully it will promote some interest in other things than just crawling through old temple ruins. And despite this modern use of Angkor Wat, it's pretty simple modern use as a site of worship to practice rituals and ceremonies. The history and design of the site really is fascinating, and as time goes on, we are still finding new carvings that have slowly been worn away, so remains of carvings or remains of paintings that were once on the walls. And as technology advances even further, who knows what else we might find at Angkor Wat. Thank you for listening to my presentation. Sorry again that it's probably not very visible here. And here's the sources I used.